Hello true believers. On my Twitter account I have already stated that all of the content I create is dedicated to the Sentry. This video is a rare exception, since I will mostly be talking about Stan Lee, one of the few men who have built the comic book industry out of nothing and turned it into a mainstream medium with sheer talent, passion and enthusiasm. Many of these creators are unfortunately not with us anymore. And few days ago, Stan Lee has unfortunately left us as well. Stan Lee was not only the creator and co-creator of some of the most popular and beloved comic book characters of all time, such as the Amazing Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, and the Mighty Thor.
Now don't you move. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be.
Please, kind sir, do not cut my hair. No!
Stan also had a 1 in a million personality, which entertained and inspired millions of people. Stan Lee was very passionate about comic books. You could see and feel that in every one of his sentences, written and said. There are very few other creators who were able to capture my attention and imagination as well as Stan Lee was able to do it. All in all, Stan Lee was an awe-inspiring person. I personally didn't just randomly pick "Hello true believers" as the intro line for my videos. I did it because that was a famous line from Stan Lee, and every time I write that line, I hope to end up with content which will come somewhat close to the level of magic Stan Lee was able to create. That is why my reviews for the Sentry were never a simplistic rundown of the events in the individual comic. Every time I tried to bring in more facts, link them together and almost build a small story within the review. All because of the solid foundation Stan Lee has laid out. I was also not the only one who has been inspired by Stan Lee. Countless of great comic book writers have been affected by Stan. One of them happens to be Paul Jenkins, who once did a collaboration with Stan. Over a decade ago there was a short comic book series about Stan Lee meeting Marvel characters and Marvel writers. Stan himself was writing these books, but they also featured other writers. One of these writers was Paul Jenkins, the creator of the Sentry. In Paul's story Stan visits a young Paul Jenkins and ends up motivating and inspiring him to become a comic book writer who dreams up entire worlds. In the story we also see the Sentry on a rooftop. Young Paul doesn't recognize the Sentry because at that point in his life he hasn't created the Sentry yet. Stan Lee unravels the mystery about the mysterious hero and encourages young Paul to continue following his dream. Before we continue, I really do hope that you don't view all of this as me taking advantage of the tragic recent news to shoehorn the Sentry into the situation. That is not my intention in the slightest. The reason why I'm making this video is to show how unique Stan Lee truly was. We've just seen Paul Jenkins' short and nice little love letter to Stan Lee with Sentry coming into existence in the process. But that was not the first time Stan Lee had something to do with the Sentry. Another instance was during Sentry's announcement and creation leading up to the early 2000s. Paul Jenkins was the one who had created the Sentry, but Marvel introduced the character with a marketing hoax. They started selling him as Stan Lee's long-lost creation, as Stan Lee's very first character ever, even predating the Fantastic Four. And this is where you can see how enthusiastic Stan really was about comic books. Stan Lee actually played along and did an interview with the then editor-in-chief, Joe Quesada. Stan Lee embraced the marketing idea and went along with Sentry maybe being his very first character. Not only did Stan Lee give his legendary name and status to a brand new character, but he also went along with putting that brand new character over his very own creations such as Spider-Man and Hulk. I really don't think that all too many creators would be willing to undermine their own creation to give the creation of another creator a better chance at succeeding. But that's what kind of a man Stan the Man was. He did not just try to push his own big characters, but also smaller ones from other creators. I like to think that Stan Lee led a great and fulfilling life. For the longest time I thought that the meaning of life was to mature as a person, but to never really grow up. To keep the enjoyment and passion for the little things until the day you die. Nowadays I still fully believe in that way of thinking and that goal, but I also think that there is more to strive for. Nowadays I also think that the meaning of life requires us all to have a positive impact on the world and the people who live in it, to leave something behind for others, to enjoy and get inspired by, almost to become a legend. And Stan Lee has, without the shadow of a doubt, achieved both of these states. He was passionate about the comic book medium until the very end, and he has achieved the status of a living legend decades ago. Thank you, Stan, for everything you have done for multiple existing generations and generations to come. You always were, are, and always will be the man. Rest in peace.